Attack on the USA. 4 airliners are hijacked, turned into devastating bombs. Thousands of people are feared dead.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
The world, shaken, recoils in horror. This is a special extended edition of The National. Good evening again. I'm Peter Mansbridge. Those of you who have just joined us, let us recap for you what has happened today on what has proven to be an unforgettable day. A day when the American population and the American people from across the world witnessed, and U.S. President George W. Bush called it, evil acts, the worst in human nature. A series of attacks that have been simply horrifying. At 8:45 this morning, New York time, a hijacked airliner filled with fuel was flown directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Shortly after 9 a.m., a second hijacked airliner slammed into the South Tower. The 2 towers burning was a shocking sight. At 9:40, the terror moved to Washington, D.C., where a third hijacked airliner, flying just meters off the ground, plowed into the Pentagon. Only minutes later, millions of horrified onlookers and television viewers watched as one of the massive 110-story office towers collapsed.
Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car.
Then another hijacked plane went down, this time near Pittsburgh. And finally, the one remaining tower of the World Trade Center disintegrated. As reports of the destruction came in, it was becoming apparent that the toll of the attacks would be high. It was U.S. President George W. Bush who first said what everyone feared.
Were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
And as the dust clears from Manhattan and Washington, the consequences of today's attacks are just beginning to be felt. Reporter Steve Irwin has been covering this story all day. He joins us with the latest from Manhattan tonight. Steve.
Peter, the latest here right now is that the National Guard is coming in and trying to relieve some of the police officers and firefighters and other emergency workers who have been laboring for hours, desperately trying to get any survivors who may be buried in the rubble out and into hospital. We actually have some reports, both from radio and some colleagues of mine here, that people have been getting cell phone calls from people trapped in the rubble. So there is a desperate bid right now to get in and focus on getting those survivors out.
And the problem, of course, trying to get into that area is the fact that very much there's still a terrible danger there. Fires still going, uncapped gas leaks continuing on. The firefighters seeming to say that that is their biggest problem, trying to get to the area where possible rescues could take place.
It's extreme danger. I was evacuated out of lower Manhattan twice this afternoon because of gas leaks. We went in the first time and police let us get quite close to the site, and then they came running down the street, waving their arms manically, telling everyone to get out. Get out now, there's going to be an explosion. And indeed, fires did start up, and there were explosions shortly after that. What I'm hearing also is that, as I mentioned, many National Guards are coming in. Now, whether or not they're going to let any other people go in to volunteer to help is unclear. I've heard reports of people coming in, relatives of people who are lost in the rubble right now, begging to get in to help and to do what they can, but being turned away by either U.S. Marshals, police, or National Guard.
All right, Steve, stand by. We're going to join a news conference that's just begun in New York now by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Let's hear what he has to say in this latest update.
Take a while for that to come. About other South Street Seaport. So on the east side of downtown Manhattan has power, and exactly where the demarcation line is, I'm not sure, but over by One Police Plaza, going east, there's power. And I believe there's power at City Hall now.
What are your plans for the rest of the night, for the next 12 hours? And staff? And will you all still be?
We just had a long meeting with all of the agencies to make sure they have the support that they need. They'll all reassemble here at 8, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and some of the critical people will stay here throughout the night, and we'll have representatives here, and I'll be here for a while longer.
Mr. Mayor, are you concerned about asbestos contamination?
The health department has done tests, and at this point is not concerned. But so far, all the tests that we've done do not show an undue amount of asbestos. Doesn't show any particular chemical agent that we have to be concerned about. The accumulation of it for people who are down there can become very, very irritating. And there were a lot of people whose eyes have been burned. But I don't think there's any chemical agent that we have to worry about at this point.
Do you have any idea how many police officers and firefighters you are missing?
Yes, we have an idea of how many we're missing.
Can you tell us that?
Well, it's a lot.
Well, those are the comments of Rudolph Giuliani, who is calling a briefing here in the city of New York tonight on the rescue efforts that are underway. The mayor, Steve, as you were suggesting earlier as well, the big difficulty right now in terms of the rescue effort is trying to fight the fires, and the very real possibility that other buildings could collapse as a result of the damage that's occurred already. Also, this issue about numbers, the mayor staying away from them, questions asked about firefighters and police officers. The mayor saying many are missing. He wouldn't go into numbers, and everybody, Steve, I think is afraid at this hour to even venture into the thought of numbers of what we could be dealing with here in terms of casualties.
Peter, some of the numbers I've heard quoted unofficially here are enough to literally make you weep. It's like it could be as much as a small town being wiped out. It's obviously is a catastrophe, an unprecedented scale in North America. One thing the mayor also did mention was they're not concerned with any kind of chemical contamination. That's something people I witnessed on the streets earlier today were very concerned about, was that there may also be some kind of chemical attack here. I popped into one hardware store, and they'd already sold out of the several dozen masks they had, and the one I bought was basically just a sanding mask that you would use to sand your floor, which would be no good, but it still continues to be a concern, I know, with many people here that I've talked with tonight. As far as the number of firefighters go, as I mentioned in an earlier report, I talked to one police officer who said he had lost a number of friends in an instant when the second tower collapsed, and he suggested there may be dozens of his colleagues in the firefighting community who have also perished in this.
All right. Back into the news conference by Rudolph Giuliani, the mayor of New York.
A while earlier, so at least closed until then.
Mr. Mayor, Arab Americans for Peace issued a statement condemning the attack and asking for Americans and New Yorkers to withhold judgment until after an investigation has been completed. But they're also concerned about the fact that Muslim communities here in New York will be targeted for harassment both by law enforcement officials and by community members because of the nature of the attack.
Just the opposite. They will receive extra protection. That's the point of what I was saying earlier. Nobody should engage in group blame. The reality is, whoever is responsible for this, law enforcement will figure that out. The United States government will figure it out, and the retaliation will be, I'm sure, very, very strong, and make an example out of those people. But nobody should try to make that determination on their own. Nobody should blame any group of people or any nationality or any ethnic group. The particular individual is responsible and the group's responsible. That's up to law enforcement, and it's up to the United States government to figure out. And citizens of New York should, even if they have anger, which is understandable, and very, very strong emotions about this, it isn't their place to get involved in this. Then they're just participating in the kind of activity we just witnessed. And New Yorkers are not like that. So we're sensitive to that. The police department will have special patrols in those areas of the city. And anybody that tries to do anything like that will be arrested.
Mr. Mayor, is there anything you could say to put to rest of the fears people have?
Everything is being done to try to make the city as secure as possible. The president the FBI, federal government, the state, the governor, the New York City Police Department, law enforcement authorities. Everything is being done that can be done, and people tonight should say a prayer for the people that we've lost, and be grateful that we're all here. And tomorrow, New York is going to be here, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to be stronger than we were before.
Last question.
Police Commissioner Carrick, did you lose any top people in your department?
No, not to my knowledge, not at this point. We have suffered losses. There was a contingent of cops that was with the mayor and I, and Chief Ganji and First Deputy Meehan. The mayor and I left them. We were gone about 10 minutes when that portion of the building fell, and I had a number of people there. We haven't found them yet, so I don't know the numbers. I don't know yet.
We're still hopeful that we're gonna find people,
and we
have not given up hope that we're gonna be able to find some people.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact.
How do you know?
I can't get into it right now, but we do know there are people in the building that are alive, and we're making every effort to get to them.
Are those members of those police officers, Commissioner?
Excuse me?
Are those police officers?
There are some police officers, yes.
How many? Which building are they in?
Two that we know of.
How many? Two?
Two.
Do you know which building they're in?
Which building?
I can't say right now.
Have police officers been pulled from the rubble already alive?
Yes, there are a number of people that were taken to the hospitals.
Can people be heard from
Yes.
inside the rubble? Is that how you know? Can people be heard?
I can't get into it right now.
We have a group of shelters that are available in Manhattan. Bayard Rustin High School, Seward Park High School.
All right, the mayor now
Washington.
giving local information for the city of New York, but that is the first direct official confirmation we've had from an official in New York City. The police officer standing behind the mayor, deeply affected by the fact that he is convinced he has lost friends and colleagues today. But the first direct confirmation that there are people alive in that rubble. He would not go into detail as to why he knows that, but we have already heard unconfirmed reports earlier this evening that cell phone calls were being made to relatives to suggest that people were trapped inside the rubble, were still alive, and were desperately hoping for rescue. The police officer saying that rescue efforts are desperately underway now to try to get to people who are trapped inside the rubble. The other piece of news at the top of that statement from the mayor is that it appears the chief of the fire department, the New York City Fire Department, and the deputy chief both lost today when those buildings collapsed. There were hundreds of firefighters inside the building desperately trying to help those who were trapped inside the building immediately after the hijacked aircraft hit it, and before it collapsed. They were trapped in the building when it did collapse. Back to Steve Irwin for a moment in New York City. Steve, perched atop one of the high-rises in New York City, when you look around there now after this day, what do you see and what do you think?
Well, what I see is abandoned streets, which I've never seen here in New York. Virtually there are no cars on any of the streets in Manhattan, and the occasional vehicle you do see go by usually has a cherry light flashing on the top of it and a siren, hopefully carrying someone who's been pulled out of the rubble to a hospital where they can be attended to. I know for myself this has been a very long day, and the adrenaline is just starting to leave my body, and it's a real kick in the gut when you start thinking about the numbers of people who actually perished today and the numbers of people who are still trapped in that building. I know tomorrow, as the mayor said, New York will still be here, but when everyone wakes up here, it's going to be a very different place and a very different world.
Steve Irwin, who has been reporting for us today, all day today, on the incredible nature of the story that's unfolded in New York. Steve, thank you. We'll be back to you again later on this night. Steve Irwin in New York City. Well, now back to the other epicenter of this terrible day, the American Capitol, and our chief Washington correspondent, David Halton. David, what can you tell us about the latest from Washington?
Well, Peter, still a lingering sense of disbelief and shock here. It's been a long time since F-16s have flown over this city, and well, it's a long time since an infantry regiment has been deployed here. But if anything, I sense a little bit of reassurance tonight in a very strong speech, State of National Address from President Bush on TV, making the point very clearly, not only that the terrorists will be tracked down, but also that the countries who harbor those terrorists will be punished as well. This significant because all throughout the day, officials here have been telling us that there are strong indications that Osama bin Laden, based in Afghanistan, is involved. So this would seem to suggest that if that is borne out, that the Taliban government in Afghanistan would be very much a target for reprisals. But also strong words from President Bush, Peter, tonight about the need to restore, to get government departments here back in business quickly, and also significant references to the need for to have a strong economy here. That important because a lot of concern here that the current slowdown in the U.S. economy might accelerate into a full recession as a result of the uncertainty and general insecurity over today's bombings.
You know, David, just as we've witnessed in New York, that the attempt at trying to stem the damage there, still fighting fires, still trying to deal with gas leaks is underway. Reports from Washington, where one of the other hijacked aircraft slammed into the Pentagon building, that they are still fighting fires there, which could have a serious impact on their attempt to restore order tomorrow and that have the Pentagon back up and running.
Very much so, and we've heard from the Secretary of Defense earlier this evening that the casualties there are numerous in his words, and that there have been significant fatalities during the attack on the Pentagon building. So clearly the Pentagon will take some time before it gets back to full operations. There are a lot of illustrations today from Congress, a lot of Democrats and Republicans saying that this is a time to rally behind the president, which they appear to be doing, but also questions being asked, Peter, about why 4 hijackings could happen on the same day, why they could happen and not be detected, and also significant questions about why there appears to have been a huge U.S. intelligence lapse in the fact that officials here are openly admitting that they had no advance warning of these bombing attacks.
And questions that I'm sure are going to linger for some time to come. David Holton reporting to us tonight from Washington. Well, let's move from south of the border to this side of the border now as we go to Ottawa and our chief political correspondent, Jason Moskowitz. Jason, what can you tell us about the atmosphere in that city tonight?
Well, we can tell you that the Prime Minister has canceled his trips for this week. We're told that he'll spend a great deal of time at 24 Sussex, where he will be constantly briefed by security people, the RCMP, the armed forces. Clearly, information is what the Prime Minister needs, wants. He will continue to tell Canadians tomorrow to remain calm. He will offer all the help that Canada can to the United States. And once again, Peter, at times like this, the Prime Minister is a man of few words, and he wants to know what exactly is going on before he has a lot to say.
You know, Jason, in spite of the fact that there was ever any direct evidence today of any security threat to this country, there's no doubt that no chances were being taken in that city, as across the city all kinds of things were happening in terms of security.
There was a time here this afternoon, early afternoon, Peter, when before the normal traffic that you would see, the streets were closed off, the barricades were up in front of the Parliament building, visitors were asked to leave. You couldn't get onto Parliament Hill without showing your ID card from the street rather than from the door. Certainly, measures were in place today.
All right, Jason Moskowitz talking to us tonight from our bureau in the nation's capital. Now, no one at Canada's airports and borders has ever witnessed a day like this one, tense, confusing, and chaotic. The CBC's Terry Malewski is at the Vancouver airport tonight, where flights bound for the United States from Asia made an unplanned stop. Terry, what can you tell us?
Well, Peter, as you know, Canada tonight is a kind of staging ground for hundreds of flights, no less than 500 flights that had the misfortune to be in the air when the attack on the World Trade Center unfolded on their way to the United States. They were diverted to Canada. Canadian airports were clogged and shut down, and this created a logistical nightmare, not least here in Vancouver, because it's the only major Canadian airport on the West Coast that can handle these planes. And, of course, there's a huge volume of trans-Pacific traffic. All the flights to Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, San Diego. They all ended up here. 34 flights, roughly 5,000 passengers are here now. And a very difficult job trying to figure out what to do with them. All the baggage had to be searched because of high security measures. Nobody knew, was there another hijacker perhaps on one of these planes that had chickened out? Everyone had to be checked. People took as long as 5 hours after circling the airport, and maybe an hour on the ground, then as much as 4 hours to get through security and immigration in order to move on, perhaps by bus to Seattle or find somewhere. But some people just didn't find a solution. I just talked to a gentleman from Saigon coming on Japan Airlines on his way to Los Angeles, where his home is now, and he's wandering the Vancouver airport now, unable to find a hotel room, unwilling to leave without his bags, which are still being searched, or they're stuck on the plane. We still have a lot of chaos, but there's one common theme. In most cases, the pilots never told their passengers what the truth was. Only in one case that we've heard of did the pilot tell them the truth, terrorist attacks in the United States. In most cases, they made excuses, mechanical problem, medical emergency, and these passengers, thousands of them, had no clue what was going on until they landed on the ground.
You know, Terry, the assumption is here that the Americans are not going to allow air traffic over their country until at least 12 noon tomorrow, but one shouldn't assume, if in fact that is the case, that things will rapidly return to normal. It is going to take hours, if not days, to sort out the air traffic that will have to leave this country to get back to the United States and then resume any kind of normality to air traffic in this continent.
It may not be as early as noon tomorrow. Some of the passengers I've spoken to this evening said, well, they told us 48 hours, maybe I'll take the bus to L.A. There seems little doubt that there's no alternative for these people but to wait for the FAA, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, to decide that it feels comfortable allowing flights landing in the United States again. And most people have been told by their airlines, look, they won't be in a rush to feel that way. They're not going to be, their principal objective is public safety. Don't assume that they're going to open up at noon tomorrow just because they say that it won't be before noon tomorrow. Most people here expect it to be a lot later than that.
All right. Terry Malofsky reporting to us tonight from Vancouver in a situation that is echoed in various airports across this country, especially on the two coasts. We've had reports from St. John's and Halifax of a similar nature to the situation in Vancouver, and there is some similarities too in the Pearson Airport situation here in Toronto. Well, this attack was shocking both in its scope and in its devastation. As the morning unfolded, so did the horror. Here is the National's senior correspondent, Brian Stewart, with a detailed look at 2 hours of terror.
Early Tuesday morning, thousands of air passengers in the U.S. are boarding flights to the West Coast. Shortly after 7 a.m. in Boston, Newark, and Dulles Airport, Washington, an unknown number of terrorists on suicide missions board 4 separate planes, slipping somehow through normal security. 7:59, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles takes off on time. A Boeing 767 carrying 92 passengers and crew. Within minutes, all 4 airliners carrying terrorists are up in the busy skies of the eastern states. In these minutes, New Yorkers are fighting morning traffic to get to work. As many as 50,000 normally enter the twin 110-story towers of the World Trade Center. It's an obvious terrorist target. Was attacked 8 years ago. But today, there's no sense of menace or alarm. At around 8:15, there's serious alarm among air traffic controllers who notice that Flight 11, having climbed to 10,000 meters above the Adirondacks, is veering off course and heading for New York. For the next 30 minutes, they watch an apparently hijacked plane streaking towards Manhattan. Then within minutes, they see a second plane veering off a western course, aiming directly for downtown New York. At 8:42, all hell breaks loose over New York as that first plane, Flight 11, crash dives straight into the North Tower of the Trade Center, causing catastrophic loss of life. Only 18 minutes later, just after 9, a stunned city sees the second United Airline plane swoop unerringly into the side of the South Tower.
Taking a look. Oh my God! My own
And there's more on the way. At 9:38, American Airlines Flight 77 crashes by the west wing of the Pentagon. A Boeing 757 with 64 aboard, it had taken off from Washington's Dulles Airport before swinging around to dive onto the very command center of America's military. Minute by minute, horrors mount. Just after 9:50, the unthinkable. Back in New York, the entire South Tower of the Trade Center collapses in monstrous avalanche of concrete and steel, bearing huge numbers of wounded and rescuers. One doctor on the scene, Mark Heath, has a video camera with him and captures moments at ground zero.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help. Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you. This is the car I hid behind. It saved my life. Oh, wait, maybe it was this one. They say someone needs help.
Yeah, Mike! Mike! Mike, come over here! Yeah!
Anybody need a doctor?
Who are you?
Don't have oxygen.
Hello, Doc.
Hey, that guy needs some oxygen. If someone can share it with him.
10-4.
Thanks. They told me just to wait here at this semi-staging area. See if I can help, and that's what I'm doing. They won't let me go any closer. No one can go in to get the people out. There's small explosions still going on. So far, I've seen some people who needed oxygen from the dust. No one trauma.
5 minutes later, an unprecedented fear sweeps Washington. 10:05, the U.S. government, now fearing an all-out attack, even evacuates the White House. Presidential staffers are moved quickly out of the very core of the nation's capital. Now, at 10:10, the fourth plane crashes. A United Airlines 757, Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco with 45 aboard, suddenly disappears from the radar and disintegrates as it crashes near Johnstown, Pennsylvania. 15 minutes later, at 10:29, all U.S. civilian air travel goes to ground. International flights to the U.S. are diverted to Canada. Canadian airports start receiving scores of airliners that soon crowd the tarmacs. In New York, desperate attempts are being made to save those trapped in the remaining North Tower. Often, little can be done. Then at 10:29, the drumbeat of calamity reaches its peak. Incredibly, the North Tower of the Trade Center also collapses. In this aftermath, people scarcely believe their eyes. An event so threatening that shortly after 11 a.m., much of Manhattan is evacuated. amid scenes that seem almost out of science fiction. As it absorbed terrorist strike after strike this morning, the government of the United States went on a virtual war footing. The president even commanding for a time from a bunker prepared during the Cold War for nuclear combat. And probably not since Pearl Harbor has America felt more directly threatened or more fiercely determined to strike back. In just 2.5 hours from that first takeoff in Boston to the collapse of the second tower, the United States and the world were changed in ways that are still uncounted and surely still incalculable. For The National, I'm Brian Stewart.
We go back to New York now, once again for that shot, the nighttime skyline shot of New York City, now minus the two towers at the World Trade Center. More reports coming out tonight now of people trapped in the rubble using cell phones to call family members, pleading with support and asking for rescue efforts, which are underway at this hour, but they're still fighting fires to get anywhere near the rubble. One man caught under the rubble used his cell phone to reach his family in Pennsylvania with a plea for help. His wife received a call from him saying he was still trapped under the World Trade Center. He gave specific directions and said he was there along with 2 New York City sergeants. Paramedics waiting to be sent into the rubble were told that once the smoke clears, it's going to be a massive body count. Emergency medical service worker Louis Garcia said initial reports indicated that bodies were buried beneath the 2 feet of soot on streets around the Twin Towers. Garcia, a 15-year veteran, said bodies are all over the place. So far, police officials say no people have been found alive, but they do say they have evidence, confirmed evidence, that there are people trapped under the rubble. So tonight, the rescue efforts continue in New York City. In this country, word of the attacks stopped Canadians in their tracks. They gathered in front of televisions in public areas. They got on their cell phones to let others know. They broke the news to strangers on the streets, and all the while they were trying to comprehend what they were seeing, what they were hearing. Norman Hermont now with the disbelief and horror felt throughout this country.
Across Canada, people watch the unthinkable unfold across the border. As news of the enormity of what happened sunk in, office towers in Toronto started to empty.
It's a terrible tragedy. We have someone there at the World Trade Center this morning at a conference, and we haven't heard from him.
It's scary. I'm scared, I'll be quite honest with you. And I just called my wife a few minutes ago and said we're heading home, and she's very happy about that.
No matter where people were, the reaction seemed to be the same. Disbelief.
It's like a movie. It's not real.
It's like you're watching a movie, you know?
It's insane. It's just like a movie. It isn't. It's actually surreal to me to see it on TV and see major buildings collapse.
For many people, there was sympathy for a country so tightly connected to Canada.
For all the people who have died, please bless them, Lord, and their families.
In Saskatoon, there were prayers from these students and questions about what comes next.
What's going to happen in the next week or 2 weeks? Like what the United States is going to do? What if people are actually going to admit that they were the ones who did it and why they did it?
In city after city, people were transfixed by what they were seeing. Some concerned events could now spin out of control.
President Bush is already saying that he's going to hunt down whoever's responsible. I don't know. I'm just scared that we're going to have to be on our way to war.
Everywhere, there was a sense after today, the world may never be the same.
As of today, this will affect everybody around the whole entire world. No matter where you live in, what town you're in, it will affect you somehow.
The question being asked more than any other, why?
I just wish there wasn't that hate. Because that's a problem.
The problem for many people now, dealing with the devastation so close to home. Norman Hermont, CBC News, Toronto.
The main attack struck at the very heart of New York's financial district, and there too there was havoc. The New York Stock Exchange will be closed tomorrow, and there will be ripples on financial markets around the world from Europe to the Orient. Havard Gould now on the economic impact of the attack.
Closed in the chaos, it isn't clear when the Canadian stock exchanges will reopen. The American stock exchanges will remain shut for at least another day, as the world's biggest financial center struggles to understand the extent of the losses, the buildings, the infrastructure, the people.
Clearly, there are going to be some disruptions to financial businesses and to other businesses that were located in the affected areas.
Stock markets around the world slid when the attack started, but economists can only guess at the full impact to be felt in the days ahead.
The big picture right now is extremely uncertain. We already had a lot of doom and gloom about the global economy. This is just going to add to that. I'm very concerned for colleagues in New York, obviously, and it's unprecedented what we're seeing happening, so impossible to predict, but I can't say it's going to be good news.
The key, the U.S. consumer, the last pillar holding up the economy in North America. Americans have been resolutely spending in the face of mounting debt, layoffs, and shutdowns. Now this.
There is no question that the confidence in the U.S. has been shattered. We have been in a recession, but this is going to be another blow.
How U.S. consumers react may well decide whether the world is plunged into a global recession.
Over the past year, we've seen financial turbulence, but we've never seen the type of financial turbulence precipitated by these types of terrorist acts before, so to predict their outcomes is impossible.
So only when the first shock is dealt with and when institutions like the stock markets get up and running again, only then will it be possible to truly assess the economic damage done here to the economies of the United States and the world. Howard Gould, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, all day, a lot of Canadians have been worried about people they know in New York City, family, friends, colleagues. Joan Leishman now on how some Canadians spend an agonizing day watching and waiting.
It is embedded in the building. I can't see from my vantage point whether it has come out the other side.
The moment these pictures hit TV screens, many Canadians began to worry, especially those with family or colleagues in New York's financial district.
I was talking to him 2 or 3 minutes before the plane hit.
Len Pace of Oakville, Ontario is one of them. Pace's brother-in-law, Ron DiFrancesco, worked at the World Trade Center. He was in his office on the 84th floor of Tower 2 this morning when Pace reached him moments after Tower 1 was hit.
I got through to him on the first try. It was really short. He just... I said, "It's Len." He said, "I'm okay." He obviously knew that the calls are coming, and he said, "I'm okay, but I gotta go." You could hear the sirens going off, or the fire alarms going off in the background, and he's a broker, so it sounded to me like there was still a lot of, there might have been trading going on, although I'm not sure of that. So I talked to him for 15 seconds. Got off the phone and then phoned my brother in Montreal to tell him that I had spoken to Ron and that he was okay. And as we were on the phone, literally 2 or 3 minutes after I had spoken to him, he watched the TV, he was watching TV live and watched the plane fly into the second building. We were both fairly technical, my brother and I, and we both sort of immediately said, I said, where did it hit? And he said, you know, what's his office number? And we both figured that it was below what the office number was where the plane hit. But, you know, if the stairways are intact and he got out and he got down the stairs, then he's okay. But if he wasn't down the stairs, then he's probably dead.
There was no final word for 3 hours.
Start thinking of eventualities of, you know, funeral planning, and if he was still in there, that there's no way that they would have found his body, I don't think. So just going through that process of grieving, even without a body, there's all sorts of things that you start thinking about that, you know, getting ahead of yourself maybe. And finally, you know, after basically a couple hours of trying to find out what was happening, I decided to come home, and I got here at about 11:30 or 12:30. And as I drove into the driveway, my wife came out and gave me a big hug and said that he's okay. He talked to marry my sister, and he's fine.
Pace himself works as an investment realtor in Toronto's business district and knows of many others who had friends or family in the Trade Center complex.
There's a neighbor who's got work colleagues down there who one of his colleagues might have lost a couple of relatives. And I think that there's probably 20 or 25 people within 1 degree of separation from me that I know who would have worked down there. This is
Len Pace doesn't know whether to credit luck or divine intervention, but for him, the extreme fragility of life became very clear today.
This is a picture of him up at our cottage last summer. You're never safe, I don't think, anywhere, potentially, but you can't live your life in fear either. You have to, I think, live it and for me, a day like today really underlines that sense of family that we've got, and I think you have to enjoy that. You have to live life in the moment and enjoy the people around you and appreciate them, because when something like this happens, you certainly do appreciate them.
It's also been a frantic day for Cheryl DeMarco of Edmonton. Her son Michael is a systems analyst whose office was at the World Trade Center.
He's there all the time. He works and works and works, and I thought we might have lost him. And I really was calling his wife to make sure that she was okay. She's got a new baby, and then when I got the answering machine, I thought, oh my God, Michael, pick up. And he did, but he picked up thinking I was his office, calling back because they'd been cut off. And I said, this is what happened. Your building has been hit. Thank God you're at home.
Moments before, Michael DeMarco had called into his office. The only words he heard were, oh my God. Then the phone went dead. DeMarco was calling his office to say he wouldn't be in this morning.
What he had done was worked late the night before until 10 or 10:30, and then it's an hour trip back to Jersey where he lives. And his wife has just had a baby, 3 months old, so he thought, I didn't get home last night, I'll just stay and work from the house this morning. And thank God that he did, because had he gone in, I'm sure the story would be different.
Although her own son is safe, Cheryl DeMarco remains shaken and concerned about what all this could possibly lead to.
I cried all morning, and I'm just sick inside because, and then my other son has been put on alert for Los Angeles. He's the sergeant with the police department down there, so I kind of feel, I just hope everything is okay. I think everybody in the world is shaken up by this. It's so hideous.
It's too early to tell how many Canadians have been affected by this tragedy. The Department of Foreign Affairs will say only that calls from anxious friends and relatives are continuing to pour in. For The National, I'm Joan Leishman in Toronto.
As we mentioned earlier, the Canadian Blood Services says it's expecting a huge demand from the United States for blood donations. To find out the location of clinics and hours, you can call 1-888-2DONATE. And to check on Canadians who may have been caught in the attacks, Foreign Affairs has a 24-hour emergency service. That number is 1-800-387-3124. Be advised, though, both numbers are extremely busy. Of course, once the scope of the attacks hit home, concern and anger spread quickly across the entire United States. The CBC's Diana Swain was on assignment in Florida when all this happened. She captured some of the reaction in that state.
It's monumental, the scope of the catastrophe.
The enormity of what happened was delivered by a small screen.
It's just madness, I think. Just kind of shocking.
10,000 people, and that's not even a final count yet either. It's probably more than that.
Here in small-town Florida, where the local lumber yard has been around for decades.
Probably the worst thing that ever happened in this country. In Europe.
The only talk was about the attacks.
Crazy, crazy people out there.
I think it's an act of war, but don't know who we're at war with.
That's right, Jimmy.
Fearful of more attacks, parents were taking no chances.
I went and got my son out of school.
She thought the airplanes were going to bang into our school.
She wasn't alone. Parents rushed to take their children home.
I was scared for him, and I know that in the schools, I used to work for a school, that they'll turn the TVs on and let the kids see what's going on, and I was afraid that he might be a little scared about it too. I'd rather have them with me.
When he sees what happened?
Yeah.
Teachers tried to keep the students calm while dealing with their own stress.
What was your reaction to it when you realized what was happening?
Well, I think everyone was shocked. I think any time the United States is attacked, you know, we're gonna be in shock because we think it can never happen in the United States.
No one here took any chances. Back at the lumber yard, talk quickly turned from anger to retaliation.
Times have changed. A bunch of crazy people out there that have no respect for nobody.
Well, a country that harbors a fugitive, they're no better off than the damn fugitive.
Nope.
They want the countries involved to pay.
I feel like if that's the country that is covering him, that they ought to level the whole country.
We need to go back to an old-fashioned isolation. We need to back up a little bit. We need to take stock.
The attacks happened hundreds of kilometers away, but even here in small-town Florida, people are traumatized and afraid. The reality of just how vulnerable they really are has been brought home with horrifying clarity. Diana Swain, CBC News, in Oakland, Florida.
"14 hours ago to this minute, when the first aircraft hit the first tower of the World Trade Center in New York City, and it has turned into a disastrous day ever since that moment. Let us update you on the latest angles that are being covered at this particular hour in New York City as we look live once again at the pictures of the harbor looking across towards the skyline of Manhattan. There are reports now tonight in New York that police have arrested 2 people after intercepting a truck full of explosives on the George Washington Bridge. Now, there are no further details on that, and this is one of these things that you have to wait for further details, whether these are people who were up to no good at this hour or whether it was a construction vehicle. We do not know, but we do know that 2 people have been arrested after a truck full of explosives was stopped by police on the George Washington Bridge in New York. Also in New York, the mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, confirming in the last hour that there are still people alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Police desperately trying to, and fire officials and rescue officials desperately trying to get to them, but having to fight fires and leaking gas problems to get there. They know they're alive because cell phone calls have been made to families. CBS reporting in the United States now that in Washington, anywhere between 100 to 800 bodies may be trapped inside the Pentagon building, also the target of a hijacked aircraft earlier today. And finally, this information on U.S. military maneuvers. The USS Enterprise, originally in the Persian Gulf, had started to head back towards the Atlantic in the last couple of days. It has now turned back towards the Persian Gulf. Military analysts are saying this may be a sign that the United States military is moving into place to perhaps make a strike against whomever it believes was behind today's attacks. Today's attacks made the world's major superpower look more vulnerable than ever. Tonight, officials at every level in the United States are saying never again. It is now a wounded nation ready to retaliate. As Carol Off reports, there are a lot of questions about how all this will ripple around the world.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested.
The United States of America shut its doors today and went into a state of fear and suspicion. Like a fortress, it sealed borders and for the first time in history closed down all air traffic.
Oh, I think we're really off the scale in terms of any terrorist precedents.
U.S. terrorist expert Brian Jenkins says there's only one thing in American history that compares.
I think people here are reaching for the only historical metaphor that they have, and that is Pearl Harbor. This, in effect, will be the Pearl Harbor of the beginning of the 21st century, a signal event that somehow is seen as bringing about some fundamental change in how the United States may look at the world.
The United States has been the target of terrorism for decades. A violent attack on a U.S. embassy in Beirut 20 years ago shocked Americans. But in 1993, when a bomb exploded at the World Trade Center, terrorism took on a new meaning for Americans. They were not safe, even in their own cities. The U.S. government considered this man the mastermind behind the World Trade Center bombing. Osama bin Laden is called America's #1 enemy, perhaps the most wanted man in the world. Bin Laden is a wealthy Saudi businessman turned holy warrior. He's trained a generation of freedom fighters for Islamic extremism. The U.S. blames him for many attacks, including explosions in 1998 outside 2 U.S. embassies, one in Kenya, the other in Tanzania. By midday today, U.S. security personnel were saying they had good indications that Osama bin Laden is responsible again. He's considered the only one with an organization large enough to do this. John Ziegler is an adjunct professor of political science at Carleton University.
But this is an enormously sophisticated operation, both from the intelligence point of view as well as the operational one, and that limits the people who could be involved. And of course, most of the fingers are being pointed at Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan.
But Brian Jenkins warns against blaming anyone specifically.
It's always a danger that the analysis will look for someone to point to, and that Osama bin Laden will invariably be our default category. Now, to be sure, Osama bin Laden is responsible for a number of attacks and could not be removed from the list of suspects. But we tend to try to personify terrorism, a faceless phenomenon, and identify it in terms of a single villain.
In the past, the U.S. has reacted swiftly and brutally to attacks against it. In 1998, American cruise missiles slammed into a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. The State Department said Osama bin Laden was making chemical weapons there. The U.S. shot missiles at bases in Afghanistan that it claimed were training camps for bin Laden's people. The attacks were also to retaliate against the bombing of the U.S. embassies. But going to war against terrorists is not like conventional war.
The difficulty with this one is Osama bin Laden has never taken credit for any terrorist attack and says that it's only the anger at the United States that provokes people to take these responses, and has not claimed any credit for it. And he's not likely to claim any credit for this one in that sense. So no one's taking responsibility, therefore the target is invisible.
Buildings were still burning in Manhattan and Washington today when Americans were talking about revenge.
I think it's a disgrace, and I think President Bush should act immediately, without hesitation, of the Pentagon, and nuke every terrorist state in the world.
I think that anger will demand some type of response that is considered appropriate, although I don't know what response can be and in what measure we would calculate appropriateness here. This is a major attack on the United States itself. We have never in our history suffered a blow of this magnitude.
The likely target for the U.S. would be Afghanistan, where it's believed the Taliban government gives refuge to Osama bin Laden. Taliban has denied any involvement. So has every other terrorist organization in the world. Without blaming anyone, President Bush only suggested retaliation would be swift and decisive.
But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
The political rhetoric out of the U.S. today suggests a lot has changed. The anti-terrorism campaign of the past is now called a war. U.S. politicians and pundits declared that anyone who harbors America's enemies will now have to pay the price. But identifying who or what the enemy is will be the first order of business. For The National, I'm Carol Off.
Well, on a day when the world seems very confusing, we count on one person to help bring a certain clarity. Here's Rex Murphy with his point of view.
What started this morning at 8:45 New York time, when the first hijacked airplane, passengers on board, was rammed into the first World Trade Tower, was the terrorist 21st century version of Pearl Harbor. What we saw and what we've been seeing all day from the heart of New York and the power center of Washington is a scene of deliberate carnage on a scale and visited with a suddenness that has produced an epidemic sense of shock all over North America. It wasn't just planes which were hijacked this morning. It was the idea that North America was a closed, protected space, was exempt from the dirty forces and staggering pain of present-day history. We should pay some attention to the dreadfully perfect symbolism of the targets, the great towers of the World Trade Center in the very heart of the financial capital of America, and the Pentagon itself, the symbol of power in the capital of power. The terrorists wanted to do much more than rain death on thousands of innocent, ordinary people. They designed this series of actions as carefully as any playwright to carry an unequivocal message through these symbols that their enemy is America, its system, its wealth, and its power, and to carry the further message that the hatred of America in their eyes is so utter and perfect that any manner of deed and any number of deaths have their demented justification. Today's horrors have the added horror that they were a contemplated, a deeply thought about end. They were designed, and in that, as well as in the nature of their targets, they were the terrorist equivalent of a declaration of war. These acts were new and singular. They were meant to establish a new threshold. They have brutally expanded the boundaries of what we must now, as part of our everyday psychology, consider possible. It was a serving of notice to this side of the world that this side of the world is no longer showmaster or spectator, that the brutalities and incitements and rancors from Northern Ireland to Kosovo, from the Middle East to Afghanistan, the stuff of our TV screens, which always take place over there, now have, in the rubble, blood, and dust of downtown New York, a first world local address. The curtain of our North American exemption from the actualities of the world's darker turnings has been breached in the first year of a new century. The truth of this could be seen even on the streets of Toronto, and I'm sure every major Canadian city. I say even because in this country we sometimes think, next to the U.S., that we are spectators too, not actors. But here too, the violence today had its impact. People were absorbed and anxious in a manner I have not seen during any other time. Who was responsible? What the U.S. will do in retaliation? For retaliation there will be. Whether today was a complete event or the beginning of some even larger one, these are the awful particulars that each passing hour will ripen. What is already complete is a change in the equation, in the psychological and conventional assumptions under which we, here in the West, have carried out our business and gone about our lives. We won't be talking about Gary Condit or the seating plan of the alliance with quite the same fervor from here on in. We are no longer exempt from the madness and evil of our always unhappily, sometimes fanatic planet. September 11th, 2001, terrorism has gone global. For The National, I'm Rex Murphy.
That is Rex's point of view. We know you will express yours as well. And as usual, we will be ready to hear it through no matter how you send it to us, by email, by phone, by letter. Just a reminder now, CBC News will remain on the air right through this night. We will go live to all important briefings. We will have analysis of any important developments, and we'll be following this story for many days to come. We have our teams dispatched throughout North America, covering this story and around the world. For those of you here in Canada, and for those of you in the United States who have been watching us throughout this day on the USA cable network, it has been a day we will never forget. Night has fallen over New York and Washington. Tomorrow will bring new revelations and new angles to this incredible story. I'm Peter Mansbridge in Toronto.